Sweet, sharp, deadly. One bite sealed a killer's fate. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Love hearing from new listeners. Tell me where you're watching from. Your presence adds zest to every story. Let's unravel this one. It started with a lemon tart. That's not metaphor, I mean a literal pastry. Delicate, golden, probably sinful by Wolfe's dietary standards, and handed to me by a woman who looked like she could have made it or killed with it, possibly both. Was halfway through cataloguing the week's bills when she showed up at the door. Tallish, with a feathered hat that looked like it had lost a fight with a vintage millinery and won, and eyes that told you the smile was optional. She didn't give me her name, just handed over the tart, said, "He'll want to taste it," and waited like she expected me to throw down rose petals and call for trumpets. "Lady," I said, "if this is a bribe, you need to know you're aiming high." He once turned down a six-figure retainer because the client wore mauve. Her mouth twitched, which was the closest she came to amusement. Tell him it's about her, he'll know. Now, that got my attention. Most people who want a word with Nero Wolfe bring checkbooks, sob stories, or trouble. This one brought citrus and mystery, and dropped a pronoun like it was a grenade. I carried the tart in like it was evidence, which, technically, it might have been. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, of course, which meant I had exactly 22 minutes before I could disturb him, without getting barked at like a Saint Bernard with a sinus infection. I used the time to sniff the thing, check for any cyanide overtones, and consider whether we'd just met a very refined poisoner or the most passive-aggressive baker in Manhattan. When Wolfe finally descended into the dining room, black suit, the yellow vest, and the sort of frown that could put butter into therapy, I presented the tart on a saucer like a good butler in a bad farce. He stared at it, then at me. "It's not my birthday, and it's not yours. Explain." "Delivered with no card," I said. "Woman, tall, French perfume, and an accent she wore like a scarf, light and expensive. Said you'd want to taste it. Said it was about her." His eyes narrowed like blinds being drawn against a rising sun. That's when I knew the capital H in her was doing work. Wolfe never liked personal pronouns unless they were directed at himself. So when he accepts one without clarification, you can bet it's because clarification hurts. He didn't touch the tart, not yet. Just sat, steepled his fingers, and murmured, "Pfui." Which, if you're new here, is Wolfe for everything from "how tiresome" to a foundational betrayal of the Republic. In this case, I guessed it meant, we are no longer alone in this matter. "Call her back," he said finally, with a tone that suggested he was placing an order at Rusterman's, not summoning a mystery woman with a citrus agenda. "I shall see her in the office." That right there told me we weren't dealing with a client. Clients get vetted, clients get fees. This was something else, maybe a ghost, maybe an old debt, maybe just someone with the power to get Nero Wolfe to forgo his usual levels of inertia. Didn't ask questions. Yet. But I noted the slice he finally cut into the tart and the fact that he didn't complain once about the crust. That was either a compliment or a warning. 15 minutes later, the lady was back, sitting in Wolfe's office like she owned the building and had just gotten bored of the deed. Her name, when she finally gave it, was Genevieve Worsley, and, judging by the way Wolfe looked at her, as if she'd walked out of an unpleasant memory and into his orchid-scented sanctuary, I knew this wasn't going to be about lemon. It was going to be about something a hell of a lot more bitter. Genevieve. Worsley sat like she'd never sat improperly a day in her life, which made her choice of seat in Wolfe's office all the more telling. She didn't take the red armchair we reserve for clients. No, she went straight for the damask-backed chair near the bookshelves, just to the left of the globe Wolfe never spins. That chair isn't exactly off-limits, but it's not on the usual menu. The move said she knew the room and its owner. I stayed standing. Wolfe hadn't asked me to sit, and besides, I wasn't done sizing her up. She had the kind of face that would be called handsome before it was called pretty, high cheekbones, a deliberate jawline, and a mouth that knew its way around both a compliment and a lie. She wore a tailored coat the color of ash on slate, and a little gold brooch shaped like a rosebud, delicate, deceptive, and too symbolic for coincidence. Wolfe, of course, didn't greet her. He doesn't greet people. He permits them. He allowed her presence the way a lion might permit a sparrow into its den, out of curiosity, not charity. She looked around the office like a widow inspecting an old estate, then locked eyes with Wolfe. "So you haven't redecorated?" "I see you have," Wolfe said mildly. She smiled. It wasn't warm. "You never did care for fashion." "Nor falsehood," he replied. Well, that escalated. She didn't flinch. "I'm not here to stir old sediment, Nero." Wolfe's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Then don't use first names." That was my cue to cut in. "We might need a program here. You two know each other?" Genevieve didn't look at me. "Once, briefly." "Once," Wolfe echoed, "was enough." The room paused. You could feel it, the way a piano waits before the next chord. Then she reached into her purse and produced a small black envelope. Not sealed, no monogram. She laid it on Wolfe's desk like a pawn before a queen. "It's not for you." "It's for her." "Her again," I said. "We're going to need a roster." That got me a look, cool, sharp, and probably deserved. But it wasn't from her. It was from Wolfe. He didn't open the envelope. Instead, he looked at Genevieve, as if he were still trying to decide whether she was part of the problem or the problem itself. "Explain," he said finally. Genevieve exhaled once, as though she'd been expecting this moment and regretting it in equal measure. "There's a girl," she said. "Her name is Claire Leventhal. She's 27, my goddaughter." "That explains the pastry," I muttered. Wolfe gave me a fractional nod, which in Wolfe-speak means "not now, Archie." Genevieve continued. "Claire is in trouble, the kind you won't read about in tomorrow's paper, but it could become that very quickly." "Legal trouble?" Wolfe asked. "Worse, social." That word hit the room like a cough in a courtroom. Wolfe hated social entanglements, vague, slippery things with no statute or standard of evidence. I stepped closer. "What's she done?" Genevieve hesitated. "Nothing, that's the trouble, but someone wants it to look otherwise. They've been maneuvering her, isolating her, setting traps." "She an heiress?" I asked. "No," she said. "Worse. She's talented." That got a blink out of me. Wolfe, of course, didn't move. "She's a pastry chef," Genevieve said. "Just started working at a private culinary incubator, one of those start-up kitchens for boutique food ventures, the kind that's funded by people who never touch a stove. Someone's sabotaging her, quietly, intelligently, and effectively. You." "Have proof?" Wolfe asked. Genevieve opened her bag again and produced a slim file. Not a folder, this was personal, not professional. Clippings, emails, a few snapshots. One showed Claire at a culinary competition, mid-pour on a lemon glaze, looking focused and radiant. Another showed a mangled tart, crust collapsed, citrus filling bleeding across the plate like a crime scene. "She's being set up to fail," Genevieve said. "And if she does, it won't just be failure, it'll be disgrace, public, professional, permanent." "And what do you want of me?" Wolfe asked. Genevieve smiled, and it wasn't sweet. "You know exactly what I want. I want you to find out who's doing this and stop them." Wolfe glanced at the tart, still on its dish, still half untouched. "You presume," he said quietly, "that I care." "No," she said. "I presume that you're still the man who taught me that ideas are sacred, but execution is art. She has the art. You have the execution." Silence. Wolfe didn't speak, but I saw it, the micro-shift in posture, The faint downturn of his mouth, the blink that took half a second too long. This wasn't about a pastry chef. This was about him. I broke the silence with a question. You said she was being maneuvered. Any suspects? Genevieve tilted her head. 4, maybe 5, all in her kitchen collective. A chef, a supplier, a business partner, a marketing director, and possibly the building manager. Quite the tasting menu, I said. Wolfe closed his eyes. I waited. Then, I will not leave this house, he said to no one in particular. Of course not, Genevieve said. That's why I brought Archie. I cleared my throat. You two always plan things without me, or is this just a Thursday special? Genevieve gave me her first real smile. You're charming, Mr. Goodwin, but you'll find charm won't get you far with these people. They're immune to it. I shrugged. So is he. I manage. Wolfe opened his eyes. Very well. I will take the case. Just like that. I didn't show it, but I felt it. Something had just shifted in the house. Wolfe doesn't take cases based on feelings. He takes them for structure, for challenge, for logic. But this wasn't about logic. This was about Claire Leventhal. And maybe, just maybe, about Genevieve Worsley, too. She stood, smoothed her coat, and nodded. You'll see, she said. It's not about the tart, it's about the trap. Then she left. The door clicked behind her like the end of a sentence. Wolfe didn't move. I waited, then said, She was important to you. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, Find out everything you can about the kitchen, its members, their motives. And the girl? He glanced at the half-eaten tart. And the girl? I nodded, grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Outside, the city smelled of spring and secrets. I had a lemon tart in my gut, a list of suspects in my pocket, and a hunch that something wasn't just sour. It was curdled. Would you like to proceed with, the next morning found me 2 espresso shots deep and standing in the industrial lobby of a Soho brownstone that had been turned into what the brochure called a culinary co-laboratory. I had no idea what that meant, but I assumed it involved artisanal bread, ambition, and very sharp knives. The place was called Pavone, Italian, for peacock, because apparently naming your kitchen after a loud, flightless bird is branding now. Genevieve had gotten me a visitor's pass, though I had to pretend to be a food investor named Martin Denton, who was exploring boutique gastronomy verticals. I didn't know what that meant either, but I said it with confidence, and nobody asked for a business card. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Kitchens aren't supposed to be quiet. They hum, clatter, hiss, and swear. But this place was muted, like someone had lowered the volume on ambition. Claire Leventhal was in Kitchen Bay 3, a small space tucked behind a glass partition, plated in brushed steel and anxiety. She was hunched over a copper saucepan, whisking, something lemon-colored with surgical precision. She had short curls, a chef's jacket with her name embroidered too neatly to be accidental, and the kind of expression that meant she'd bitten her tongue for the last 3 weeks, and wasn't sure what she'd say if she stopped. I didn't approach her yet. Wolfe had been clear, observe first, disturb later. So I took the tour. There were 4 others sharing the kitchen floor, and in the interest of building our rogues gallery, I'll introduce them the same way they introduced themselves to me, reluctantly, and with something to hide. Milo Crane. The star chef Crane ran Kitchen Bay 1, and you could tell. The walls were covered in framed press clippings, including a New York foodie profile that called him the bad boy of balsamic. He had a jaw like a soup can, and the kind of arms that looked like they beat dough and people equally well. Introduce myself. He looked at my shoes, then my face, then my non-existent investment portfolio. You're with Genevieve? He asked. Indirectly, I said. Looking into culinary growth, he snorted. She always was a romantic. Thinks pastry is poetry. And you don't? He pulled a duck confit out of the oven and didn't answer. Just muttered, "Claire's good. Maybe too good." That was clue language. I filed it. 2. Trina Shaw. The marketing director, Trina, didn't have a station. She had a desk in the glass-walled mezzanine overlooking the bays, decorated like an Instagram influencer with minimalist taste. She wore a matte black jumpsuit and a silver stylus behind one ear like a dagger. She smiled at me like I'd just overcooked her brand identity. "Genevieve told me you might stop by," she said. "She didn't mention what you're fishing for." "Neither did I said. Her smile twitched. "If this is about Claire, it's a misunderstanding." "Meaning?" "She's oversensitive. If a tart flops, she thinks it's sabotage. If someone criticizes her plating, she hears conspiracy. She's not imagining the issues," I said. "Everyone here has issues," Trina replied. "This isn't a bakery, it's a battlefield." I liked her immediately, not personally, but for the file. Rowan Bell. The supplier, Rowan, was young, bearded, and had the posture of a man who'd spent too much time defending organic citrus from skeptical investors. He supplied Pavonnet with curated produce from upstate farms. I caught him delivering blood oranges and microgreens out back. "Claire," he said after I introduced myself. "She's sharp. Too sharp, maybe." "You mean talented?" "I mean intense. She doesn't schmooze. People notice that." I nodded. "Ever seen anything weird happen to her orders?" He hesitated. "There was a batch of eggs last week. Looked fine. Turned out most were cracked. Microfractures, not visible. From the outside. Could have wrecked a curd if you didn't catch it fast, did she?" He smiled. "Barely," she double-checked. "Most wouldn't have." He liked her. That made me mark him down for further scrutiny. Loyalty makes for bad alibis. Derek Fallon. The partner, technically, Fallon was Claire's co-founder. They'd started a dessert concept called Citronade, pitched as a neo-classic citrus experience. Wolfe would have thrown a tomato at that phrase, but Derek was tall, elegant, and wore shoes that cost more than my rent, so I pretended to be impressed. "Claire's a genius," he said. "But geniuses are fragile. She thinks someone's targeting her. I think it's stress. Stress breaks your oven temperature sensors." He blinked. "She told you about that." "She didn't have to." Fallon leaned in. "Look, I don't think anyone here is malicious, but Pavonnet's competitive. Chefs burn out fast. Claire's sensitive." That was the second time I'd heard the word sensitive used like an insult. I didn't buy it. Simone Dalka, the manager, last. On the list was the building manager. Simone ran logistics for Pavonnet and looked like she'd been carved out of espresso foam and deadlines. Short hair, steel-framed glasses, clipboard always in hand. She gave me 5 minutes, no more. "Chef drama isn't my problem," she said. "I run operations, not therapy." "But you monitor the kitchen cams." "Yes, but only for equipment safety theft, not sabotage." "Anything strange recently?" She stared. "This is New York. Strange is Tuesday." I asked about access logs. She gave me a look that made it clear she'd need a subpoena or a sincere flirtation. I wasn't in the mood for either. By the time I circled back to Claire, she'd plated something elegant and pale yellow. She didn't look up. "You're not a food investor," she said. "No," I admitted. "I'm a guy who works for someone who likes orchids, beer, and mental puzzles. You're the puzzle." She finally looked at me. "Genevieve sent you." "She did." "Then you already know the answer. Someone wants me gone, quietly, untraceably, with plausible deniability and a smile." I paused. "You think they'll ruin your reputation?" "I think they'll erase it." She handed me a tasting spoon. I sampled the tart. Light, perfect, balanced on the razor edge between sweet and sour. "This isn't just dessert," I said. "No," she said softly. "It's proof." Back at the brownstone, I laid out my findings to Wolfe, who sat behind his desk, chewing slowly on a peach. When I finished, he grunted. "They're all plausible." "Yeah, but none of them are stupid, that's the trouble. Stupidity is not a requirement for guilt," he said. "Just a frequent companion." "What's the move?" He leaned back. "Something has been taken from Miss Leventhal. Perhaps not an object, but something. We must find it." I frowned. "You think this is about more than sabotage?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that this is not a matter of talent. It is a matter of trust." I stared at him, then, "What's next?" He looked toward the hallway. "I will have Fritz inventory our kitchen." That got me. Our kitchen. "Yes," he said. "I suspect this began here, with the tart. Would you like to proceed with, when Wolfe tells Fritz to inventory the kitchen, it's the culinary equivalent of DEFCON 2. Fritz takes it as a personal affront. You'd think we'd accused him of harboring contraband or worse, off-brand butter. By the time I made it to the kitchen that afternoon, he had every spice jar, flour tin, and citrus peel lined up like recruits at a military inspection. I've seen battleships less organized. "Everything is in its place," Fritz said stiffly. "No jars switched, no ingredients spoiled. I would know." "You probably would," I said. "But check anyway. Something's off. Wolfe thinks whatever's happening to Claire Leventhal might have started with that tart." Fritz frowned. It tasted fine. "That's the problem," I said. "Too fine. For sabotage, it was a little too precise." Fritz muttered something in German that I won't translate, partly because I don't speak German, but mostly because the tone didn't need subtitles. I left him to it and headed back into the field. There was something sticking to this case like powdered sugar on a black suit. Wolfe could smell it, and it wasn't lemon. I had 3 goals for the afternoon: follow up with Claire, sniff out inconsistencies among the kitchen crew, and see if anyone flinched when I mentioned the tart. Claire Leventhal, round 2 she. Met me at a sidewalk cafe in the village under protest. "You shouldn't be following me," she said. "It makes this feel worse." "It's supposed to," I said. "Fear sharpens the senses." She stared at her coffee. "Did Wolfe send you? Would I be here if he didn't?" She gave a small smile. "Fair. We got down to it." I asked about her relationship with the suspects one by one. Here's what I got. Milo Crane. He's respected. He's also a control freak. He thinks everything below flambe is beneath him. Trina Shaw. Sharp, too sharp. She treats branding like it's war. Once told me lemon wasn't luxury enough. Rowan Bell. We talk. He's been kind, but he gets twitchy when you ask about delivery errors. Derek Fallon. Long pause. We were friends, close. Now he's different. Simone Dalka. Efficient, cold. Like the building itself, everything works, but you don't ask how. I pushed on Derek. Different how? He used to back me on everything. Now he second guesses, hesitates. We had a prototype tart go wrong last month. He claimed the acidity was off, but I never changed the formula. And was it? No, she said firmly. But the eggs were weird. The texture was wrong. I didn't notice until it was baked. Filed that away under sabotage, subtle, and moved on to the others. Trina Shaw. The taste of Doubtback at Pavonnet. I caught Trina scrolling through a product shoot on her iPad, adjusting shadows and filters like she was retouching a movie. "Star, not a fruit tart. Back again?" she said. "Still shopping for investments, or has Genevieve hired you to sniff out phantoms?" "Let's say I'm testing for mold." She arched an eyebrow. "You won't find it here. Maybe not in your pastries, but maybe in your personnel." I dropped Claire's name. Her posture stiffened. "She's talented," she admitted, "but she's not a team player, won't adapt. Doesn't think marketing should have input." "Maybe marketing shouldn't." She gave me a tight smile. "This is Manhattan. Image is half the product. And the other half, survival." That was a little too honest. I made a note. Derek Fallon. Old friends, cold tension. I found Derek in the conference room, sipping ginger tea and peering at a spreadsheet like it might punch him. He didn't look thrilled to see me. You said Claire was paranoid, I began. But everything she's worried about is actually happening. Faulty equipment, sabotaged ingredients, he sighed. I don't want this to blow up. Then help me contain it. Has anyone had access to her workstations outside regular hours? He hesitated. Maybe Milo. He sometimes borrows her stand. Mixer. That's personal. It's communal space. I leaned forward. You're hiding something. No, he said. Just remembering things I'd rather forget. That line rang out like a bad lyric. He didn't elaborate. Milo Crane, the brute chef. He didn't like me asking about Claire. He liked it even less when I brought up the tart. I've never touched her ingredients, he barked. She's territorial. Then how did you know the mixer was hers? Because she won't shut up about it, he snapped. You try. Working next to a girl who treats egg whites like religion. Was there tension? He shrugged. She's too good to fail naturally, so if she's failing, it means someone's pushing. That almost sounded like a confession, but it wasn't his style. Milo wasn't subtle enough for sabotage. He'd burn your tart and then dare you to complain. Simone Dalka, the watcher. Simone finally agreed to show me the hallway logs. Turns out Pavonnet has RFID tags on all staffers. Every kitchen bay logs entries and exits. Claire's bay shows a midnight entry 3 days ago, she said. No scheduled use, no permission. Who was it? She showed me the data. Derek Fallon, no explanation, no note. Just a quiet little digital fingerprint. I left with more questions than answers, and one clear lead. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out. Wolfe sat with his hands folded, eyes closed, as I walked him through each interview, every shift in tone, every twitch behind a suspect's smile. When I finished, he didn't move for 10 seconds. Then, Mr. Fallon entered. Her bay. At midnight. No scheduled prep. No meeting. Sabotage by implication, Wolfe murmured. Not conclusive, but useful. I think it's a triangle, I said. Claire, Derek, and one wild card. He nodded. There is no shortage of envy in kitchens. Then he turned to his desk, opened the tart file, and pulled a photo. This, he said, pointing, is not her usual glaze, too glossy, reflective. You think someone altered it? No, I think someone replicated it. He set the photo down with finality. Someone's copying her, closely, deliberately, enough to create confusion, and then collapse. I stared at him. To what end? To replace her, he said, or destroy her. Then, without looking, at me. Get Saul, we need eyes where no one's watching. That meant surveillance. Wolfe wasn't circling suspects anymore. He was baiting them, ready for the next turn in the trap. You'd think with Saul Panzer on the case we were running a federal operation, not sniffing around a kitchen conspiracy involving tarts. But that's the thing with Saul. He works with the same quiet efficiency, whether it's embezzlement, infidelity, or misplaced meringue. Wolfe gave him the assignment without standing, of course, just a low murmur about unobserved ingress and patterns of movement between midnight and dawn. Translation: someone was slipping into Claire's station when they shouldn't be, and Wolfe wanted to know who, when, and what they were leaving behind. While Saul got eyes on Pavonet's dark hours, I was tasked with the more diplomatic version: daylight, eavesdropping, and casual interruption. Wolfe suspected someone had crossed a line, not in a dramatic swinging a sledgehammer kind of way, but more like slipping a teaspoon from the rack and returning it bent. The kind of move that doesn't make noise but makes ripples. So I returned to Pavonnet on a Monday morning, pretending to be a brand consultant researching trends in artisanal desserts. The lie held water because I said it with a straight face and had the good sense not to wear a tie. Claire looked tired. She was wearing her whites, but they looked more like armor than a uniform. Her hands moved mechanically, sculpting candied lemon peel into delicate curls on top of what I guessed was an almond tort. Her smile when it came was automatic and about 4 watts dimmer than it had been last week. "Did you change recipes?" I asked. "No," she said, "but someone else has." I blinked. "Meaning?" She looked around, made sure no one was listening, and said, "Taste this." She handed me a small spoonful of pale yellow custard. I tasted. Tart. Sharp. Smooth as silk. Then she handed me another spoonful from a different container. I tasted again. Slightly duller. Still good, but it didn't sparkle. Like it had been made from memory, not from passion. "That's not mine," she said. "It's a replica. I found it in my fridge drawer this morning next to mine." I stared at her. "Someone made a fake version of your lemon custard and planted it next to the real one. Why?" "That's what I need Wolfe to figure out. I didn't say it, but I could guess. If a client, judge, or investor tasted the wrong one, Claire would look inconsistent, maybe incompetent. Just enough to seed doubt, Wolfe had called it. This wasn't about sabotage. It was about precision character erosion, and now it had escalated. Back at the brownstone, I relayed the custard incident to Wolfe. He listened with his head tilted back and his eyes closed, the way he does when processing treachery like it's music. Replicating a flavor profile with that degree of accuracy, he said, would require observation, access, possibly notes. "She keeps a recipe journal," I said. "Private, handwritten, no backups." Wolfe's eyes snapped open. "Then that," he said, "is what has been tampered with." I frowned. "You think they've copied her recipe book?" "Not copied. Used incrementally, in moments, to mimic her process, not all at once, but gradually, and with enough fidelity to distort the line between authenticity and imitation." It was classic Wolfe. Dramatic conclusion stated without dramatic delivery. "I'll ask her about the book," I said. "No, do not ask. Observe." "Got it. And Saul?" "He will report tonight. In the meantime, re-engage with Mr. Fallon. Apply pressure, lightly." So I found Fallon again. He was at a wine bar in Tribeca, holding a stemmed glass and talking to someone who looked like a publicist and moved like a threat. I waited until he was alone, then slid into the stool next to him. Still drinking Sauvignon. "In broad daylight?" I said. "That startup life must be exhausting." He looked like he wanted to ignore me but couldn't. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should you," I said. "But here we are." He took a sip, composed himself. "Is Claire all right?" "Define all right," I said. "She's replicating tarts and finding duplicates in her fridge." His glass paused mid-air. I leaned in. "Someone's using her own recipes against her, someone with access and familiarity." "I haven't." He stopped himself. "Yeah, that's what I thought." He swallowed. "She used to share everything. With me. Notes, techniques, flavor tests. Then she stopped. Got guarded. Can you blame her?" He didn't answer, but his face told me he did. I left it there. No point pushing too hard, not yet. Wolfe didn't want blood. He wanted discomfort. That night, Saul came by at 8:40 p.m., as regular as dessert at a Swiss boarding school. He sat in the red armchair and handed Wolfe a single typed sheet. 2. Entries between midnight and 3 a.m., he said. 1 3 nights ago, 1 last night. "Who?" Wolfe asked, not looking up from the page. First was Derek Fallon. Second was Simone Dalka. That got Wolfe's eyebrows to lift, barely. "Dalka?" I said. "She's been neutral this whole time." Saul shook his head. "She's quiet, not neutral, and she wasn't in Claire's bay." "Then where?" "The storage room, but she left with something under her coat." "What?" "Couldn't see," Wolfe spoke softly. "But she does have access to everything, including logs." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning she knows what we know," Wolfe said. "And she knows when we know it." I turned to Saul. You think she's manipulating the log system? Saul shrugged. Wouldn't be hard. She's the administrator. Wolfe stood. That, if you're counting, makes 2 vertical moves in 1 week. A record. Someone has tampered with that recipe journal, he said. I want it. Unaltered. Unredacted. You want me to steal it? I want you to recover it before it disappears, Wolfe said. The distinction is philosophical. I nodded, grabbed my coat, but before I left, Fritz called us into the kitchen. You should see this, he said, holding up a spice jar. It was labeled sumac, a lemony red powder, used in Middle Eastern cooking. Claire had mentioned she used it to balance acidity without overpowering sweetness. This isn't sumac, Fritz said. Wolfe sniffed it. Tamarind, he said flatly. Inferior, intentionally substituted. I turned to him. You think Claire's ingredients were tampered with here? Before the tart even left this house? I think, Wolfe said, we are dealing with someone who wants Claire discredited from the inside out. And now they've tried to make me their accomplice. He stared at the jar like it was a loaded gun. No more waiting, he said. Bring them all here tomorrow. We had a full board. Motives, movements, misdirections. Wolfe was ready to deal the cards. Up next, it started with a phone call. Not the dramatic kind with gasps and deadlines, but the soft click and hum of Genevieve Worsley at 7:02 a.m. asking me, in her crisp morning voice, whether I'd been to Claire's apartment overnight. No, I said. I was tucked in with Tolstoy and bourbon. Why? Her apartment was broken into, she replied. Nothing was taken, but something was moved. That got me fully upright. What exactly? Her recipe journal. Someone turned every page. Carefully, but not carefully enough. I was in my coat before she hung up. Claire's place was in a modest walk-up near Union Square, the kind of building where the walls know your footsteps and the neighbors know your mail. She looked pale when she opened the door, but not scared. Resigned, maybe. I glanced around the kitchen. Nothing overturned, nothing broken, no signs of forced entry. But there was a faint smell, cardboard and lemon oil, the kind of scent that gets under your nails and into your nerves. She pointed to the table. The journal was there, closed neatly with a single strip of yellow ribbon poking out, her bookmark. I never leave it like that, she said. The ribbon's decorative. I dog-ear the pages. I flipped through the book. She was right, every page had been turned. I could feel it. The loosened stiffness, the slight warp of recently handled paper. Whoever did it was gentle, but not invisible. The lock? I asked. She pointed to a drawer under the counter. It had a broken hasp, a clean snap, like someone had used leverage instead of force. Not dramatic, not even noticeable unless you knew what to look for. The only other thing in there, she said, was my pastry thermometer. Still there? She nodded, but we both knew that wasn't the point. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was unimpressed. A drawer broken, a journal disturbed, he said. Small tremors before the quake. But it proves someone's watching her, not just sabotaging. Her prep studying her closely. Indeed, he said, and I intend to reverse the observation. He turned to Saul, who was seated with his usual compact stillness. I want a tale on Simone Dalker and Derek Fallon, alternate every 12 hours, discreet but thorough. Any reason to think they're working together? Saul asked. No, Wolfe said, but one of them is working with someone. And the others? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Still possible, but I believe in economy of suspicion. That was Wolfe's way of saying he'd started closing the circle. I went back to Pavonnet that afternoon under the pretense of taste analysis benchmarking, which in plain English means I hung around and watched people sweat. Trina gave me side-eye from her glass perch, Milo ignored me entirely, and Rowan, Belle offered me a complimentary grapefruit no one had asked for. Claire didn't show. Instead, I spotted Fallon in her bay, again. This time he wasn't alone. He was talking to Simone, close, low voices. Then something passed between them, too quick to photograph, too subtle to describe. It might have been a note, a USB, a receipt, or nothing, but they didn't see me. I left without being noticed and called Saul. "Change of plan," I said. "Don't alternate. Cover them both simultaneously." "On it," he replied. Wolfe agreed, reluctantly. He hated throwing more resources at a problem unless the return was guaranteed. But the proximity of those two, of Dalka and Fallon, told him something he hadn't quite said out loud yet, that they weren't working alone, they were working together. That evening, Wolfe summoned Genevieve back to the office. She arrived in sable gloves and a fresh sense of indignation. "He's trying to destroy her," she said flatly. "Mr. Fallon?" Wolfe asked. She nodded. "He's been speaking to investors, quietly, without Claire." "What is he offering them?" Wolfe asked. "Her menu," she said. "Repackaged, rebranded. And the name?" She hesitated. "Citronade." But without her. Wolfe made a low sound, half exhale, half disgust. "So," he murmured, "the sabotage isn't sabotage, it's misdirection, a corporate divorce. That made sense. Wolfe had called it early. This wasn't passion, it was strategy. Fallon discredits her, she self-doubts, the business fractures, and he walks off with the intellectual property, I said. "Clean, efficient." "Not clean," Wolfe corrected. "Claire has not yet collapsed. She is, in fact, demonstrating a resilience Mr. Fallon had not anticipated. Which is why they've escalated," I added, "from kitchen tricks to surveillance to a break-in. And soon," Wolfe said softly, "they will push again." Genevieve leaned forward. "What are you going to do?" Wolfe didn't answer her. Instead, he looked at me. "Get her recipe journal." I blinked. "We already have it." "No," he said. "Get it again, the current one, as it is now. Bring it here." "Why?" "Because," he said, "I intend to replicate the replication." Claire handed me the book that evening, reluctantly. I brought it to Wolfe, who began cross-referencing it, page by page, against the tart we had tasted, and the notes Genevieve had initially brought. That's when we found it. One entry, her signature lemon glaze, had been modified. Slightly, imperceptibly. A temperature note had been changed by 3 degrees. A resting time reduced by 20 seconds. Not enough to ruin it, just enough to alter the texture. Claire hadn't done it. But someone had. "Who had access?" I asked Wolfe. He turned to me, eyes glinting. "Access," he said. "All of them. That was the trick. But motive," he tapped the journal, "only one." At 9:43 p.m., Saul called. He'd followed Fallon to a bar uptown, then to a hotel, then watched him hand a USB to a man in a tailored jacket and no tie, one of Pavonet's backers. "What was on it?" I asked. "Couldn't see," Saul said, "but I got close. Label read, Citron Rev C Final PDF. I didn't need Wolfe to translate to finalized branding materials. He wasn't just taking her recipes, he was launching them without her. Wolfe didn't speak when I told him. He just turned to the phone and made a single call. "To whom?" I asked afterward. "Saul again," he said. "We will confront them tomorrow." "All of them?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Here." "Even Fallon?" "Especially Fallon." Then he leaned back, laced his fingers and said, "The trap is set. In the Wolfe household, when invitations are issued, they're not written, scented, or optional. They're spoken by me, noted by me, and usually met with confusion, suspicion, or outright dread. This time I had 5 names, 1 living room, and the slow burn of Nero Wolfe's indignation simmering on low. Each suspect was summoned for 11 a.m. sharp, and each was told, truthfully, that Wolfe intended to review the matter of professional conflict and culinary compromise, which is Wolfe speak for you're being cornered, and you'll thank me later for not using handcuffs. At 10:52 I set out the chairs. Wolfe doesn't like group confrontations. He prefers tete-a-tete, one-on-one fencing matches where language is the sword. But this time the suspects needed to feel the presence of one another, to sweat together. The lineup was as follows: Milo Crane, professionally disheveled, wearing a double-breasted chef coat like it had survived a kitchen fire and lived to tell about it. Trina Shaw, immaculate in navy, with a digital notebook and a smirk that said she was already drafting the press release. Rowan Bell, nervously, holding a notebook that might have been a prop or a pacifier. Simone Dalka, efficient as ever, standing instead of sitting, scanning the room like she'd rather log it than live in it. Derek Fallon, calm, polite, and just smug enough to imply he'd already won. Claire and Genevieve were present too, silent, flanking Wolfe's chair like human parentheses. I stood behind Wolfe, ready to observe, interrupt, or interject. Wolfe, for his part, didn't begin. Immediately, he let the silence marinate. Only when the fidgeting reached peak awkwardness did he speak. "You are here because something delicate has been disturbed," he said, "and because I dislike being used." Fallon offered a placid smile. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wolfe, but I'm not sure—" "Do not speak unless I invite it," Wolfe said without raising his voice. "You have had ample opportunity to lie elsewhere." That shut him up. Wolfe turned to the room. Claire Leventhal's recipes, her intellectual property, have been examined, replicated, and quietly modified to create a facsimile of talent. Not as a compliment, as a theft. And that theft was used to damage her reputation while launching a separate brand initiative without her. He paused. "I find this offensive." No one moved. "I do not need to convince you of Claire's competence," Wolfe went on. "She was not targeted because she failed. She was targeted because she succeeded." He let that one sit. Then, "Miss Dalka." She looked up. "You accessed Pavonet's surveillance logs without reporting unusual after-hours movement." Her eyes narrowed. "It's not unusual for people to come and go. Chefs work strange hours." "Indeed. And do building managers typically deliver USBs to investors?" That caught her. She glanced at Fallon, quick, instinctive. Wolfe saw it. "Ah," he said. "Mr. Fallon, you recruited her." Fallon didn't deny it. "I asked her to protect my private business meetings. Pavonet's investors have proprietary interests." "Indeed," Wolfe said again. "And what were you selling them?" Fallon straightened. "My version of citronade." "You mean Claire's version?" "I adjusted her ideas, reframed them. That's not theft, that's iteration." "You also entered her station at night," I said. "Twice. For inventory purposes." Wolfe gave him a look like a cat eyeing a stale sardine. "Mr. Fallon, you changed her journal, her recipes, slightly. Enough to undermine her work without drawing attention. You counted on her pride and her fear of appearing paranoid." Fallon's composure wavered. "You can't prove that." "No," Wolfe said. "But I can prove you attempted to launch a product line with digital files labeled Citron Rev C Final, which you handed off to a backer last night, witnessed by Mr. Panzer." Fallon's lips parted, closed again. Wolfe shifted his gaze. "Miss Shaw, you enabled this." Trina looked taken aback. "Me, I had no idea." "You did," Wolfe said. "You saw the inconsistencies. You coached the branding. You used your position to steer attention away from Claire and toward Derek." Trina opened her mouth. "Do not insult me," Wolfe said flatly. He turned to Rowan. "Mr. Bell, you substituted ingredients on 2 occasions. You claim it was accident, but your delivery logs show gaps. What was promised did not match what was delivered." Rowan flushed. She asked me to—" He stopped, looked at Fallon. There it was. A ripple. Wolfe. Saw it? Pressed, she asked you, Wolfe echoed. Or he did. Rowan sank into his chair. I thought it was just a flavor test, he muttered. Derek said it would be harmless. Wolfe leaned back. So, we have conspiracy. No one spoke. Claire sat still, but her hands, folded in her lap, were trembling. Wolfe, ever the tactician, delivered his final thrust. This is not a courtroom. I offer no legal verdict, but I do offer consequence. Claire will resume full rights to her brand, her kitchen, and her recipes. You will not challenge this. You will not contest ownership. Or, he paused, I will forward a detailed report of surveillance, ingredient tampering, and proprietary misappropriation to the relevant licensing boards and investor bodies, including a certain hotel meeting captured in high-resolution detail. Fallon's jaw set. Trina looked away. Simone stood even straighter, if possible. Rowan Bell exhaled like he'd been holding it since breakfast. Is that clear? Wolfe asked. Murmurs of agreement. Nods. Guilt in high definition. Wolfe closed his eyes. Leave. They did. All of them. The house was quiet again. Genevieve lingered a moment. You could have destroyed them, she said. Wolfe opened one eye. They weren't worth the bother. She smiled. Claire rose, walked over, placed a small jar on Wolfe's desk. It was filled with a pale lemon glaze. The real one, she said. Wolfe nodded once. After they left, I poured myself a small celebratory bourbon and leaned in the doorway. You took your time, I said. I wanted them to stew, Wolfe replied. You think they'll stay quiet? Yes, and if they don't, you'll eat them alive? No, he said, I'll let Claire do it. Then he added almost to himself, culinary revenge is best served cold, preferably with zest. At 11:59 the following day, the suspects returned. Some came because they had to, others because they couldn't help themselves. Ego's a powerful motivator. So is fear. They walked into Wolfe's office one by one, subdued and sharper around the edges. The room had been arranged to Wolfe's exacting specifications. His desk immaculate, the Persian rugs freshly vacuumed, and chairs positioned in a semicircle like confessionals in a court that didn't deal in prayer. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. I stood near the globe. It never spins. Claire Leventhal was already seated, poised and composed, though I could see tension in her shoulders. Genevieve stood near the bookcase, unreadable but alert, like a statue that knew when to blink. Wolfe gave no preamble. He simply began. This gathering is not for dramatic effect, he said, though I have been accused of favoring theatrics. Rather, it is to resolve an intellectual injustice and to make that resolution irrevocable. Trina Shaw crossed her legs slowly. Fallon folded his arms. Rowan Bell kept his hands in his lap. Simone Dalker, typically stone-faced, glanced at the door once, just once, as if confirming her exit strategy. Wolfe continued, You are all participants in the operations of a culinary startup, a high-pressure, high-visibility space where originality is the currency and envy the exchange rate. A slight shift of his tone, like a pinch of spice. Miss Leventhal's work was not merely copied, it was mirrored, mimicked with precision, and then subtly degraded. This was not culinary critique. It was calculated sabotage. Trina inhaled through her teeth. I will not waste your time detailing every infraction, Wolfe said. Instead, I will show you. He gestured to me. I stepped forward with two. Covered trays on each were identical lemon tarts. I had Fritz prepare these, Wolfe said, using two separate sets of instructions, one from Miss Leventhal's original journal, and one from the altered version found in her apartment following a suspicious midnight visit. He looked at Fallon. Which you deny orchestrating. Fallon didn't reply. Smart. Now, Wolfe said, We taste." He gestured toward Claire, who rose, removed the lids, and sliced each tart. Each of the suspects received a small plate, 2 bites side by side. "Please," Wolfe said, "indulge." They did. One tart was luminous, balanced, bright, smooth. The other was nearly identical, slightly waxy, fainter acidity, a subtle dullness that lingered on the tongue like an afterthought. When they finished, Wolfe spoke again. "Miss Leventhal," he said, "confirm for them which is yours." She did, pointing without hesitation. "The other," Wolfe said, "was made from the altered recipe, the version you never wrote." Rowan blinked. Trina looked at her empty plate, like it had insulted her. Simone's jaw tightened. Fallon said nothing. Wolfe let the weight of the proof settle before continuing. "Mr. Fallon," he said, "you had access to Miss Leventhal's journal. You visited her workstation after hours. You conspired with Miss Dalker to adjust surveillance. Logs, you used Mr. Bell to subtly swap ingredients, most notably sumac for tamarind in at least 2 deliveries. You told him it was for testing purposes. He believed you." Rowan flinched. Wolfe barely acknowledged it. "Miss Shaw," he said, "you had no hand in the alterations, but you had knowledge. You saw what was being done. You assisted Mr. Fallon in creating marketing materials based on Claire's work, material you knew she had not authorized." Trina's jaw moved, but she didn't speak. "That was a first. Miss Dalker," Wolfe said, "you facilitated access. You maintained silence. You manipulated logs that should have raised red flags." He didn't ask for explanations. He offered. "None. Wolfe isn't a judge, and he doesn't bargain," he concludes. "Miss Leventhal has agreed not to press charges," he said. "But the conditions are these. All branding related to citronade will revert to her. All documentation prepared without her consent will be withdrawn. And none of you will publicly or privately question the authorship of her recipes again." He waited. Fallon shifted. "You have no legal authority." "No," Wolfe said, "but I have something you fear more. Documentation, screenshots, surveillance, eyewitnesses, logs, notes, and a written statement from Mr. Bell, who, I might add, regrets his involvement deeply." Rowan's head bowed. He didn't argue. Wolfe's voice dropped an octave. "I also have contacts. One of them owns a modest chain of boutique dining clubs. Another sits on the advisory board for a rather influential culinary school. Both will find this report interesting, and neither tolerates intellectual theft." Silence. Simone Dalker stood first. She said nothing, just nodded once and left. Then Rowan. Then Trina. Fallon lingered. "I gave her everything," he said. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow. "No," he said. "You took everything, and you misused it. Miss Leventhal gave you her trust. That is not a thing to be returned half-eaten." Fallon left. The office door closed. Wolfe exhaled once. Genevieve approached. "You've done it," she said. "No," Wolfe replied. "Claire did." Claire stepped forward. "Thank you." Wolfe nodded once, solemn and sincere, then waved a hand, dismissive. "You will not need me again. That is the true measure of success." Later, over beer and beef, Wolfe said nothing for a long time. He sat with the evening paper and a half-eaten biscuit, and I figured he was done with the subject. But as I stood to clear the plates, he spoke. "Archie." "Yeah?" "There are 2 kinds of theft," he said. "Theft of substance and theft of soul. The former you can reclaim, the latter must be rebuilt." "That what happened here?" He nodded just once. "Miss Leventhal will be better for it. The others, well, let them chew their regrets. And the tart?" He glanced toward the kitchen. "Fritz has the recipe. And Genevieve?" Wolfe's eyes didn't move from the paper. "She still knows how to provoke me," he said. "That is no small thing." Then softer, with the faintest curl of his lip, "But I am not easily trapped." The brownstone was quiet again. That might not sound like much, but around here silence is a kind of liturgy. You don't break it without cause, and when it returns, it comes with weight. After 10 days of suspects, sabotage, and subpar Tart, replicas, the silence was the best thing we'd tasted. Wolfe had resumed his routine like nothing had happened. That morning he was in the plant rooms from 9 until 11, speaking softly to a new Miltonia that apparently had trust issues. At lunch, Fritz prepared a cold chicken salad with tarragon mayonnaise and small pickled pears. Wolfe didn't comment, which was how you knew he was pleased. I, on the other hand, had a minor case of what you might call post-case compression. It's what happens after a week of non-stop observation, lying and navigating kitchen egos big enough to require valet service. You walk into your own office and expect to find hidden microphones under the lamp, or tampered paprika in the spice drawer, but everything was where it should be, even Wolfe. It wasn't until after lunch, over coffee, that he brought it up. "She will not thank me," he said. I set my mug down. "Claire," he nodded. "Nor should she. You saved her business." I corrected an imbalance. "That is not gratitude, that is restoration." I leaned against the edge of my desk. "She won't forget it." "She must," he said. "That is the cost of resilience." I gave him a sideways look. "You've been chewing on that line since breakfast, haven't you?" He didn't smile, but his mouth twitched in that subtle way that meant I wasn't wrong. "What about Fallon?" I asked. "Think he'll try again under a new name?" "He may," Wolfe said, "but if he does, he will fail. A thief who relies on stolen brilliance can only shine in borrowed light." "Poetic. Practical," he corrected. "Miss Leventhal will outlast him. Her virtue was not the tart, it was the technique, the idea." I had to hand it to him. He wasn't just right, he was right in Wolfese, which is to say both infuriating and dead on. Genevieve had left the night before without ceremony. She thanked Wolfe at the door, didn't linger, and didn't look back. That told me more than a speech would have. I asked, "You think she set the whole thing in motion? Knew you'd take the bait?" "She brought me the tart," he said, "not as an offering, as a puzzle. She knew what would provoke you." "She always did," Wolfe said. Then, after a pause, "She also knew I would not refuse." "Because of her?" "Because of the injustice," he said. "But yes, she made it personal." I sat in the red armchair, stretched my legs. "You could have sent her away." "I should have," Wolfe said, "but I am not immune to unfinished business." And there it was, the rare admission, a ripple in the pond. I didn't push. You don't poke a tiger when it's being sentimental. We sat in silence a few minutes more. Outside, Manhattan mumbled and buzzed, the way it always does. Inside, the brownstone returned to its sacred rhythm. No trespassers, no lemon traps, no false tarts. Just 2 men, an orchid house, and the kind of quiet that feels earned. As I stood to stretch, Fritz appeared at the door. "Would you like dessert?" he asked. "I made the lemon tart again." Wolfe blinked once. "No?" I raised my eyebrows. "No? After all that?" "I've had my fill of lemon for the week," he said. "Let the taste fade. That's the only way to miss it properly." He turned a page of his book, something by Plutarch, naturally. I nodded to Fritz. "Make mine a double." As Fritz disappeared into the kitchen, Wolfe said without looking up, "You, Archie, are like lemon zest, useful, sharp, occasionally overused." "And you," I said, grabbing my coffee, "are like crème anglaise, dense, rich, and best served with restraint." He made a sound halfway between a grunt and a chuckle. "That's as close as we ever get to a toast." The end. Nero Wolfe and the lemon tart trap. A case of precision, betrayal, and just desserts. Thank you for following this full-length Nero Wolfe mystery. Would you like a compiled version formatted for export or print? A second mystery with a fresh title and hook? or a summary of character arcs and key deductions? 2. Weeks later, things were so quiet around the brownstone, you could have staged a meditation retreat. Wolfe was back to his books, his beer, and his orchids. The only scents in the air were sandalwood from the library, and something herbaceous Fritz was simmering in the kitchen that I couldn't identify and was afraid to ask about. As for me, I was catching up on reports we didn't actually need, and invoices we wouldn't actually contest, because Wolfe never haggled unless principal was involved, and ingredient fraud didn't qualify as taxable. Then the envelope came, thick paper, hand-addressed, sealed with real wax. Very Geneva, very old school and very unwelcome. I brought it to Wolfe just before lunch. He was at his desk reading Montaigne again and working his way through an alarming amount of Stilton on rye. "Another letter from her," I said, dropping it on the blotter. Wolfe didn't move. "I can open it," I offered, knowing full well he wouldn't want me to. He still didn't move, but he did flick his fingers in the international gesture for, "Oh, very well, if you must." I cracked the seal, unfolded the parchment. Yes, it was actual parchment. Apparently Genevieve buys stationery from the 18th century, and read aloud, "Nero, you remain as ever intolerable and indispensable. Claire is thriving. Her first new line, independent of all prior attachments, debuted last night. It was called Reclamation, Fitting. I didn't attend. I don't need to see the roots take hold to know they've been planted properly. You will never admit it, but I suspect you enjoyed this. At least the mental gymnastics. I still remember that night in Nice, when you solved the menu theft by taste. Alone. I thought you a monster then. I think you slightly more human now, yours. In memory, if not appetite, GW. I folded the letter and looked up. You going to reply? No, Wolfe said, chewing methodically. Because you're annoyed or because she's right. She's always right, he said. That's the trouble. I stared. You miss her. I miss people the way a cat misses water, when I'm forced to remember it exists. Well, I said, if I ever start sending you letters sealed in wax, please shoot me. I would never shoot you, Wolfe said mildly. I would simply hire someone else. Claire did stop by, once. No fanfare, no tart. Just a plain envelope with 2 tickets to a pastry symposium being hosted uptown under the new Citronade label, fully restored. One ticket had Wolfe's name on it in calligraphy. The other said, +1, only if you must. Wolfe stared at them, on the desk for a full 5 minutes before sliding them into the wastebasket without a word. Not going? I asked. I have already tasted the tart, he said. What more is there? She invited you. She delivered justice. That is thanks enough. He didn't sound bitter. Just full. Like a man who'd eaten a heavy meal and found dessert. Optional. I didn't press. He'd had his taste. So had she, and Wolfe, despite his insistence that the world turn at his pace, had allowed someone else's victory to stand on its own legs. That, my friends, is growth. For Wolfe, anyway. There was one last twist, though. Fritz, that sneaky wizard, decided to remake the lemon tart using Claire's original ratios, the real ones, not from the sabotage journal, not from the post-recovery version. He found the notes, somewhere in his culinary archive. He'd kept a scratch copy, back when he first tried to replicate it from taste alone, before Wolfe ever agreed to take the case. Fritz presented the final tart on a Sunday afternoon, with no warning, and even less fanfare. Just a plate on the table and a single unspoken dare. Wolfe took one bite, closed his eyes, and sighed. I stand corrected, he said softly. Meaning? I asked. It is possible, he said, to begin again. That evening, I watched. From the dining room as Wolfe trimmed the roots on one of his orchids, a Paphiopedilum he hadn't touched in months. It was delicate, pale, and shaped like a slipper, one of the slow growers. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You naming that one?" "No," he said, inspecting a leaf. "It already has a name." I waited. He looked up. "Genevieve," he said, then, "It blooms rarely, but when it does, you remember why you waited. So yes, cases come and go, suspects lie, victims panic, Wolfe scowls. I pace, but every so often a tart shows up at the door and the world shifts. Not because of the flavor, because of the motive.